So when it comes to sustainable banking, there are a lot of terms that fall under an umbrella of ethical banking in general. And that might be social banking, environmentally conscious banking, community conscious banking. And a lot of these terms are intertwined. But today we're going to be talking about one segment of ethical banking, which is sustainable banking and the environment. With me today, I have my colleague Spencer Tierney, who works on the banking team and covers social responsibility with banks, as well as B Corps and some other terms that we're going to get into today. All right, so Spencer, can you tell us a little bit about how bank deposits actually work behind the scenes?
Yeah, sure thing. So this gets into the question of what does a bank do and how it uses its deposits. So a bank is a business, and when you open a checking account or a savings account, that money that you put in there actually gets used by the bank for funding investments and loans.
Basically, it sounds like your bank can take your money and use it towards projects that you don't necessarily believe in. So what is it that banks are transitioning towards in terms of environmentalism? What are some of the maybe smaller banks that are thinking more eco-consciously doing in order to combat these big investments that might be happening at other banks?
Yeah, so it kind of gets to a question of what is a sustainable bank or what is a sustainable banking model? And yeah, it's generally smaller banks that are able to kind of commit themselves, not only just to profit, but what's something that's called a triple bottom line, which is 3 Ps instead of just profit. So profit, people, and the planet. And with people, it refers to social impact. So workers, customers, and suppliers, just ultimately how this product or whatever they're making can affect people and the environment. And then there's also the planet, and that's, can go into the supply chain as well as just does whatever the company making, how does it contribute to the world? And those 3 Ps are helpful in thinking about it's not just a question, especially in this day and age, that how a bank can make money off of a loan. It's also, are these loans going to the right place? And so these smaller banks, a lot of them that are very serious about this commitment to the environment and to people actually get certified by a third party. So I only know a few that are very reputable and that are global and have a lot of reach. And those are the B Corp, or B Lab is the nonprofit behind it. And B Corp or certified B corporations are basically banks and other for-profit businesses that decide that part of their accountability as a business and their transparency will come from, are they making a social and environmental impact in what they're doing and what they're funding? And then another one is the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. This is not as much a certification program that the B Corp is. This is more of an international network of banks, and it's a very small group of banks.
What else can consumers do in order to figure out what different banks are doing? Is it as easy as a Google search? Is there anything else you'd recommend?
I would recommend the Google search for sure. Look into the banks in your area that are supporting affordable programs, affordable housing, or whatever kind of programs you see, especially construction projects, there's usually a financial backer. If you want to know the list of banks to avoid, or especially if you're an environmentalist, you can actually go into the Rainforest Action Network has a website. There's banktrack.org. Also, just start with your bank. Kind of figure out what is your bank supporting with just its social impact statement. I wouldn't trust just the social impact statement alone unless you can see the third party. Any other evidence beside what the bank says can be very helpful. And ultimately, you want to just support your community, the planet, and figure out what that means for you.
So Spencer, what are some banks that are currently walking the talk when it comes to environmentalism? Not only their marketing, but also what they're actually appear to be doing behind the scenes.
I would say Spring Bank, Amalgamated Bank, and these are smaller banks, but there's some that are nationwide or have online platforms. So the fintech firm Aspiration and Ando. Also, there are some that are pending B Corp status, which is actually a thing. That's, I think, Climate First Bank in Florida, as well as, I believe, Atmos Financial. And so these are kind of ones that are up and coming, but there are ones that are much more established and longer. I think Amalgamated is one, and Beneficial State Bank in California is also another one.
I'm a bit more familiar with Aspiration, for example, and I know that they're part of the 1% for the Planet program, which I believe means 1% of their profits goes back towards environmental programs and issues. And then they also don't invest in fossil fuels, and they give you, I believe, carbon offsets for purchasing gas and things like that. So Are there any other kind of tactics that these banks are using to provide environmental impacts for people's money being held there?
Yeah, with aspiration, the carbon offsets is definitely a key aspect. I think the newer fintech companies have sometimes like spending trackers or elements of like gauging and seeing your carbon impact. I've been able to see, at least I think it's Atmos Financial has a carbon like graph, at least on its website, that it's kind of going for. Again, these are kind of like more of an emerging tools that might be available. It's not really about perfection. We're not trying to find like the best, the only, like the one bank that is doing everything right, because honestly, everything is imperfect in our society and in our world. And so, it's more about improvement than perfection. And on that point also, if you are supporting the environment and you're not able to get either one of like the B Corp banks, or you're not able to find, these banks that like either certified or whatnot, your local credit union or community bank, they do a lot of good. And maybe it's not fully explicitly tied to the environment in the same way that a lot of the banks that we've talked about are, but they are still supporting your community. And by supporting the community, usually that means that, especially if they're not a big bank, they're not doing the bad stuff, which is funding the fossil fuel projects or other things that are really detrimental to the environment.
Right, that's a really good point. Because under this umbrella of ethical banking and investing and personal finance, a lot of these pillars of it are really closely entwined.
It's all combined. It's like if you're helping the environment, you're also helping people, or at least that's the ideal and the goal with these banks.
Well, I think it really comes down to people making choices with their dollars that they didn't maybe feel empowered to do before, and having the opportunity to invest with or put their money with banks who end up investing it into projects that they really personally align with and care about. Having those options is really valuable and something that I think all of us as consumers can think about.
Oh, completely. And I think we're going to see this evolve. I mean, Bitcoin mining and banks getting involved with Bitcoin or crypto, I mean, that's an environmental issue too. And figuring out those electricity costs, and they are huge. And electricity, 60% in the US, that comes from fossil fuel energy. So thinking about like these things, it's a complicated issue. And we're gonna just have to unravel and think about this over time as an ongoing conversation with our wallets, basically. This is just another step in our way to support the people and environment. Just knowing that we can actually open a bank account to help people and help the world is just, I don't think it's talked about enough, really.
A lot of folks might look at their banking as a set it and forget it kind of process that they just use for their daily finances. The thing is, it's really important to look behind the scenes at where your bank is putting money. Your bank could be lending, spending, or investing your funds into projects you might not necessarily believe in. If you suspect that this is true with your current bank, now could be a really great time to look at options that more closely align with your values. I'm Chanelle Bessette, and I'm a banking writer at NerdWallet. If you want to learn more about sustainable banking, check out Spencer's articles on our site. If you feel like you learned something, hit like and subscribe.